Thank you for leaving your houses tonight. You are hardy souls, or you're obsessed with toys. Either way, it's going to work. It's going to work. So I'm Zoe Ann. I'm the reference historian here, and I see lots of wonderful familiar faces, and some not familiar faces. We're going to have a good time tonight, because how can you talk about toys and not have a good time? So before I start, though, I am going to pick on those people that I know. So Mary, what was your favorite toy growing up? Oh, do you have lots of favorite toys growing up? You didn't have that many. Well then, it was the boys that had stuff. Your brothers? No? Oh, you're talking about your children's toys. So you raised boys, and what were their favorite toys then? They would have been growing up in the 60s and 70s?
Yeah.
All right.
Most of the 70s, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Fisher Price.
Uh-huh.
Airport.
Airport.
Houseboat.
Oh, yeah. With the little plastic people that fit in the holes? Okay.
McDonald's with cars and people.
McDonald's, the hamburger place?
Had trays and everything. Yeah. I'll show you.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Next time you clean house? Okay.
No, not clean house, clean out the basement.
Wonderful. Well, then we have someone who's of a different generation. So, young lady, I'm going to ask you, so can I ask when you were born? 1985. 1985, so almost a generation away from Mary's boys. What was your favorite toy growing up?
I was just thinking about that. I had these little, what was that little pet house? Yeah, pet house. What was that called?
Pet shop? Pet house?
The little pet shop.
Okay, and when were you born? When did you say?
85.
85, so just a couple years after my girls. Okay, Becca, favorite toy?
I had a paper doll that was a fairy, and all of her clothes were flowers. So pretty little petals, and then, so some came with her, but then we could just make flowers and flowers and flowers.
Ooh, was she something you had made, or was she mass produced? Oh, what fun. Uh-huh, uh-huh. Okay, then here, just a little. So when you two are out at estate sales, I'm looking at you, Dan. No. Do you collect anything other than paper? Do you ever pick up any old toys? You don't. You're not even tempted? Okay.
But they were more modern.
Uh-huh.
And, musical type toys.
Okay.
She's so young that I don't know if she really likes it.
Uh-huh. Okay, I just can't imagine going to estate sales and ignoring the toys. So you're better people than I. Better people than I. All right. Super. Well, tonight we are going to talk about toys, and what I've done, I created just a really fun, very fun-oriented program about 6 years ago, and since then I've presented to a little more, in a couple different more formal groups in front of teachers and museum colleagues and whatnot, and so I had to get a little more professional. And so for tonight what I did is I combined the two, so that because I talk about taking those wonderful toys, taking an artifact, a piece of material culture, and interpreting it. So at any time you have any questions, raise your hand. We're a small group, and if we don't have fun tonight, I have not done my job. Not that we couldn't have fun if it was a big group. Okay. So here we go. So the study and ensuing discussions on toys not only teach us about changing attitudes towards childhood, they exemplify the evolution of social norms and growth of our consumer culture. Toys are the material culture of play. Like other forms of material culture, artifacts such as tools, weapons, or clothing, they have different meanings in different contexts. Their importance is both commonly viewed by a group as well as intensely personal. And I think many of us can identify with that. And the same can be said for just about any artifact, any piece of clothing. It can be viewed as what were the styles of the day. And oh my gosh, I wore that to the senior prom. Okay? So the study of material culture provides us with an abundant source for gaining historical insight into the lives of those who left no other records, as well as our own histories. Toys can be viewed as artifacts of parents' interests, desires, and anxieties, as well as children's pastimes and imagination. And this is especially true when we get to talking about the Cold War era. They are my favorite toys. So, kind of like I like felons, I like Cold War. I don't know, it's kind of weird. Okay, so just so that there's no confusion, I will not be talking about play except tonight, except how it is associated with toys. And for most of mankind's history, I think it's probably fair to say that most play has been done without toys. Most play has been done with other children. Whether those other children were specifically gathering for play or for work, and then we've all seen kids play or work. It often turns into some sort of a play or a game. But toys were probably non-existent for a good share of mankind's history. Now, we do see a lot of interesting approaches to play. And if any of you remember your philosophy classes or Western civilization classes when you had to read the Enlightenment, Rousseau and his Emile, I don't know if any of you had to read those. They still left an emotional scar on me. Anyway, what are we talking here? Did I have sense enough to write it down? Yes. So John Locke and Rousseau actually during the Enlightenment disagreed on the impact of social attitudes on children's education. And Rousseau, I remember particularly because he thought that boys especially needed to be removed from their mother at a relatively young age because they needed to become good citizens, and evidently women couldn't quite achieve that goal in Rousseau's age. But that certainly changes in the not long after Rousseau passes away. So they, and in fact, it was during the Enlightenment that we see our first alphabet blocks made. So now we've got a game that is teaching and playing, and a toy. Victorians saw play as a means of keeping children occupied and healthy. And during this era, wealthy families often constructed nurseries some distance away from the rest of the family. That would have been nice at some moments, raising boys and girls. So late in the 19th century, reformers defined play as a means of molding the young and perpetuating familial and social values, especially becoming good citizens. Right. Play was now viewed as an essential element of development, growth, and happiness. Experts espoused the need to provide an environment which would stimulate children to enhance creativity, independence, and independence and development. So began the pressure on parents to not only make certain their children were doing healthy play, but to get the right toys there. So that pressure on parents starts very early. This pressure from child specialists really becomes obvious during the progressive era, which is, I put it from about 1895 to the end of the First World War, and we're going to talk about the progressive era in a little bit. So, and then if you're interested in really reading some, heavy-duty stuff, there is a book by an interesting sociologist, his name's Huizinga, and it came out in the 50s, and it's Homo Ludens, or man at play. And he goes so far as to talk about comparing wartime and how we've learned to play. But I'm going to steer away from that. But depending on circumstances, and we all know this, there's different kinds of play. There's that informal play where you can watch kids. All of a sudden there's a mud puddle and They're having the time of their lives. Or there's formal, there's that informal, and then there's formal play. And that is something that a lot of sociologists have looked at when they start looking at children's games and our times, or trying to look at the times. Because that formal play, or play that has rules, whether it's tag, hide and seek, Annie, I over. Anybody play that? We used to play that for hours. I had a brother who was a lot taller than I. Well, both brothers are a lot taller than I am, I guess. And one of these days I was going to beat them. I never did. But anyway, so that's just a quick overview of play and the study of play. But we're going to talk about toys tonight. See, again, look at, all it took was a mud puddle. And then the other one has got to, there's got to be about something about water and children running through the sprinkler up above. And it's 5 below outside. Okay, so toys are material culture. That is anything that's been created or shaped by man or women. All right? And the material culture speaks to the human culture and the human condition. Museums, as well as our homes, if you have furniture, if you have clothing, if you have books, if you have a house, you have material culture. And it's what fills our museums. Right? Material culture is just a wonderful way to learn about history and to learn about our own lives. Particularly when we start talking about toys, right? Toys not only teach us about history, but as I've mentioned, they teach us about our current culture and about our own lives. So those three-dimensional objects. So you take this material culture and do what those folks that I hang out with do an interpretive process. And it sounds technical, but it's really not. And I've got handouts. I've got handouts for you to take home. And if you have grandchildren or children at home, I really encourage you to grab them. And especially going into the Christmas season, sit down with your grandchild and start talking about your toys and their toys and see what happens. Okay? So that is going to be part of the interpretation process or analysis. We just start looking long and hard at these particular toys and start asking specific questions. For instance, and this is just, these are basic questions. What is the object? Okay. This was my Nancy Ann doll. So, what is the object? This is Nancy Ann. What does she do? She looks pretty. She bends, but probably more importantly, she holds clothes well. She has nylon stockings, and she has, yes, a girdle. Okay, she was a precursor to Barbie. So what did the object do? How is it used? I had 2 of them, and this one survived. They were just great dolls, and we played house. Who made it? Well, the Nancy Ann Doll Company. Who used it? I did. What importance did it have? She survived probably because about the time I would have been wearing her out, I got a Barbie doll. And so she wound up in the bottom drawer. And thank heaven, because she's survived, even though she's older than Barbie. And then what were the relationships among the object, its function, the people who used it? I got her I've been told, for Christmas one year. And interestingly enough, I remember getting my first Barbie. I was in 1st grade. But I do not remember the Christmases where I got Nancy Ann. Okay? But boy, Mom and Dad, and I had to have been little. Look at the fact that they trusted me to put nylons on a doll. And then, but look at her. I'm going to point to her feet and how big her feet are. We're going to talk about size of feet later. What connections can we make between this story and our own lives? Okay. I've already told you about the brief history, but then it's time to do research. So if we were to do some quick research, and I'm a I'm a researcher, and so I do not encourage this, and if anybody repeats this to anybody outside this room, I'll deny it. But do a quick Google search. Under Nancy Ann dolls, and lots of different dolls will come up. Nancy Ann Company started making dolls in the 30s. Okay? And there was, in the 50s, there was Miss Revlon, Miss Nancy Ann. There were several dolls that were almost identical. But they were created to be perfect teen dolls and for little girls to dress and become ladies. Right? So there's just one example of a toy. An interpretation. All right. So, again, we can take the toys, which are material culture, and start looking at them as artifacts. And when I say artifacts, I don't mean that we need to treat them as if they were irreplaceable. Please don't wrap them in acid-free paper and take them out of the light of day. But start looking at them as pieces of history. Okay? So they are examples of children's pastimes and imaginations, and I would add parents' anxieties. And beyond a doubt, and I had to include this quote because Paula Petrick is a co-author and editor of a book about children, and this is a quote of hers. There's a bit of magic in the study of toys. We all played, we all enlisted items to assist us in our play and amusements, and we are all products of our time and place. And ain't it the truth? So, all right. Now, many factors contribute to the culture of toys. And when I say the culture of toys, I mean also then the study of toys or the conversation we can have about toys. First, of course, there's just the simple chronology. How old is it? What's the oldest? What's the most recent? Gender roles and preparing children for childhood, or excuse me, for adulthood. Thank you. As soon as I saw your eyes, for adulthood. And of course, this is big. And no matter how egalitarian, is that the right word? Egalitarian, we think our society is, you walk down the boys' aisle and the girls' aisles at Kmart or Target, and they are different. And if you don't believe me, try to find some fun Legos for little girls. They're still all pink and they're all... Anyway, I'll get beyond that. The boys have the castle system, the pirates, the wizards. Little girls have just happy little shops and tea. Okay, ethnicity. Were the same toys coming out of China as Germany in 1850? Oh, probably not. The raw materials, of course, is an interesting topic. The technology, oh boy, howdy. Now it is, technology is the toy. And the social attitudes and mores. Okay, so pre-Civil War, and I've not forgotten Native Americans, so bear with me. But pre-Civil War, one young man who was born in 1922 listed his favorite toys as pulleys, catgut, a magnifying glass, building blocks, broomsticks, whalebone, and spiral springs. It would have been, let's say, about 1850 when he was writing. So it sounds like a toolbox to me. All right. Another author from the same period talks about marbles, hoops, kites, balls, and pocket knives. So pre-Civil War little girls had jump ropes, rubber balls, rings, rag dolls, and playhouses. By going into the 1860s, of course, the vast majority of toys are homemade. Any purchased toys were definitely a luxury item. Okay, so there's no debating that the first toys in Montana would have been made by Native Americans for Native American children. And just like their European counterparts, they would have been using whatever materials were on hand, such as willow sticks, bark, animal hides, and bones. And I've got just a couple examples. We have nicer examples in the toy exhibit and I think in Ninook. But these are some I made, and I got to tell you, they're really hard to make. I bled trying to make these things. Okay, I've seen craftsmen take a willow stick and you can tell it's an elk. You can tell it's a deer. You can tell it's a horse. Mine just are some four-legged creatures. But Native American children's created toys from sticks. They would have pretended that they were help. Thank you. Bows, travois, and dogs. After their introduction of the horse, the children would have made stick horses. Didn't we all have stick horses? All right. Their elders created dolls, bows, and hoops from available materials. And these were all intended to help them prepare for adulthood. Okay, and isn't she a lovely little girl? All right. So, evolving materials was another means of looking at toys. As with our Native American predecessors, settlers' children also used sticks as horses. That seems to be universal. Their parents used available materials to create dolls, included rags, sticks, corn husks, and wax. Has anybody made a rag doll lately? Becca? How do you, describe how you did it. Same as a handkerchief doll? Pillowcase? Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Just take a rag and fold it over, and in the middle part, just bring it up here and tie yarn around it. That's her head, and then take the ends and tie knots on either end, and you've got a doll. Pretty basic. I remember seeing someone do that for their little girl in church. It was when everybody carried handkerchiefs, so I had to have been pretty young. And she whipped out a doll out of a handkerchief. I thought it was sheer magic. Oh my gosh. So, evolving technology and materials used by toy manufacturers: porcelain, wax, paper mache, and composition. This little girl is composition. And it's sawdust, very fine sawdust, made with a paste, for lack of a different term, and put in a mold and then painted. You don't want to get these little girls wet. This is a Nancy Ann doll from the 30s. Okay. Paper and cardboard. Of course, cardboard boxes. If you've ever unloaded anything out of a cardboard box and had a toddler around, or for that matter, I think 8th and 9th graders, kids like cardboard boxes. 1940s, we see then a great revolution in plastic. It's because it's inexpensive and sturdy. Okay, let's see what else I've got. So that's evolving materials. The standardization of toys. And this is huge because with the establishment of the railroads in Montana Territory, so if you figure the railroad came to Butte in 1881, and I have to refer to my cheat sheet. So Butte in 1881, the last spike ceremony was at Gold Creek for the Northern Pacific in 83, and by 89 and 90, the Great Northern was headed across Montana. But with that, we've got quick mail, relatively quick mail. We complain about 3 days now since the post office moved to Great Falls, at least I do. But catalogs, they're huge. For the first time, we can have a little boy in Libby, Montana, whose dad is a logger, have the same toy as a rancher's son outside of Miles City. That standardization of toys and the beginning of the consumer culture that we are so familiar with today. We may not want to admit it, but oh boy, we're in the midst of it. So by the 1880s and into the 1890s, the railroad and mail order catalogs began to standardize children's toys. And this is especially true in Montana because it's so darn big. Children's play is beginning to reflect a growing dependence on toys. Although purchased toys are more readily available, they still are considered inferior by most. Boys and girls continue to play with rag dolls. However, they now had manufactured toy houses, monkeys on a stick, and manufactured boats. A child out of the 1870s who had been, a man who had been raised in the 1870s and looking back at his childhood wrote that the arrival of the railroad meant that homemade sleds and little homemade wagons would pass. Homemade bows and arrows would, as an art, disappear forever out of the life of American boys. The accumulated manufactured goods would make up for all of these losses. Scroll saws, skates, balls and bats, masks, books on magic, dumbbells, and boxing gloves. You notice we're starting to look at sports, those balls and bats, the boxing gloves. Little girls coming out of the 1870s played with wax dolls if their mom and dad had money. And the contents of their toy boxes became more sophisticated. They would have been made up often of houses, manufactured houses, and dolls. As with every era, there are often differences prompted by gender. There are always differences prompted by economy. And in the frontier, Montana boys were given wooden horses, tiny wagons, lassos to fling at dogs and horses or sisters. And otherwise, they are encouraged to amuse themselves out of doors in the world of men. Their sisters, on the other hand, received toys which reflected that domestic sphere. Parents with money, again, gave their daughters porcelain and wax dolls with furniture and china cups. Lesser affluent families would have given their girls dolls made of wood, rag, socks, and corn husks. However, by the end of the 19th century, so going into the 1900s, the toys found in typical homes begin to look very familiar to us. Sleds, skates, checkers, wagons, dolls, jump ropes, croquet sets, paper dolls, tea sets, doll carriages, tops, balls, wagons, and of course, marbles. From 1900 to 1920, play and its ensuing toys are very similar to those previous eras, but activities begin to require more equipment because the sports become more and more popular. While the children are still playing hide and seek, by 1921, most toys, both in and out of urban areas, are requiring teams and other people, and lots of team sports. But we also then have the advent of the bicycles, baseball, basketball, and hockey. All right. Now, I had to include the next because this is the most amazing toy I've ever seen. Right. This, a very similar collection, is at Fort Missoula. And I can't say out loud that I played with it. Okay. So we're going to be talking about action figures here pretty quick. And before we do that, I have to explain that there is so little new, as the saying goes, under the sun. Teddy Roosevelt was a folk hero. He was a hero. And he and his son Kermit did a lot of traveling Mr. Roosevelt did always publicize these things. But he and Kermit did an African safari, and afterwards, a toy company made sets so that little boys could go on safari with Teddy Roosevelt. So we have black porters. The porters' heads, depending on which one you're looking at, and I kind of looked at one, they can put stuff on top of their head so that they're helping Teddy go across the savannah, all right? And his helmet can be removed. There are, depending on the toy set, there are animals, everything from elephants to, you can see there's an antelope here. There is a camel there. Action figures. And can you imagine finding that underneath the Christmas tree? We didn't have to, in the 1912, there was no worry about political correctness, of course. And wow. Have you ever seen anything like that? But think about then, the action figures we have today are just like puppets and marionettes, and they've been around for centuries. They've just evolved. Okay. All right. Honest to gosh, I've never seen anything like it. So that 1912, that was in the progressive era. And I mentioned that earlier. The progressive era is from where we can trace a good share of our favorite toys. Lincoln Logs. John Lloyd Wright, yes, son to Frank, designed them to promote simple living and creativity. And it does, I don't know about the simple living, but boy, kids are creative. Lionel Trains. These toys have wonderful histories. So Joshua Lionel Cowan, 1903, created a small engine, and he was a small engine inventor. And he created the first, what we consider Lionel train, but he also created what we call the ever-ready battery. Raggedy Ann, or Andy. Andy came along later. So Mr. Gruel first drew a face on a rag doll for his daughter Marcella, and just 3 years later published the first Raggedy Ann story. Skookum dolls. Does anybody remember Skookum dolls? See, they're not, again, not politically correct. They're sold as souvenirs, plastic Native American dolls, and very stereotypical, but at one time they were sold all over the West. They were invented and manufactured in Missoula, Montana. Chemistry sets. I have to read you the history behind chemistry sets, because this is kind of interesting. So in 18th century England, druggists and other shops would sell little kits to people, including all the chemicals, all the glassware, whatever, probably depending on how much you were willing to spend. They were fully stocked with glassware, porcelain labware, and wooden boxes. But by World War I, a company called Porter Brothers, who ran the Porter Chemical Company, started importing kits from England. And eventually, they evolved into what we now consider chemistry sets. Soon after the first import, an inventor and entrepreneur called Mr. Gilbert, and he's going to show up later under erector sets, introduced chemistry sets at his own company. And within 10 years, there are 15 companies making chemistry sets. And then here's the erector set. According to tradition, Mr. Gilbert invented the erector set by observing steelwork along the New York Railroad in 1913. He was a graduate at Yale Medical School. Isn't that fun? Tinker Toys, 1914, they were a reaction to the erector sets. Pedal cars. Of course, this was not going to happen until after the invention of the car. But there are pedal cars that were created that had windshield wipers. They were little miracles of Toyland. Oh my gosh. What else have I got? I just had a great time doing that. And of course, teddy bears. Interestingly enough, Steiff in Germany, and then the shopkeepers, Morris and Rose Michton from Brooklyn, started publicizing stuffed bears about the same time. But of course, Steiff, when she was doing it, had no idea that this was the same time that Teddy Roosevelt, he had shot a bear or saved a bear, I can't remember exactly what. But the shopkeepers in Brooklyn, there'd been a cartoon about Teddy Roosevelt hunting bear, and they had sense enough to put the cartoon that had been in the paper in their store window with some stuffed bears, and the rest, as they say, is history. So those are just the toys out of the progressive era that we still see today. The 20s, 30s, and 40s. All right, these are fun. This is a good story. Pogo sticks were patented in 1919. They were to be sold at Gimbel Brothers department store in New York, but there was a problem. The first pogo sticks were wooden, and during their shipment from Germany, they rotted and warped. The department store still wanted to sell the toy, but they asked for an improved version, and so they were able to get to a factory that built all metal pogo sticks. Are you ready for this? To promote this new toy, the Ziegfeld Follies girls used them during performances. Well, that leaves a lot, and I'm going to leave that to your imagination, the rest of it. Yes. Okay, Monopoly. Again, amazing, amazing history to this game. But even though versions had been played beginning in 1883, a woman named Ruth Hoskins changed the game's street names to street names within Atlantic City in 1933. Since then, over 500 million people have played Monopoly. Sorry was created in 1934. Oh, I used to love beating my brother because he was such a poor loser. America's favorite revenge game, Sorry, first produced by Parker Brothers in 1934. Viewmasters, 1939, first appeared in New York World's Fair. All right. Say again? Viewmaster. It says photographer William Gruber invented the Viewmaster system in 1938. He used an old idea for the new color film that was just being offered. By chance, he met Harold Graves, the president of Sawyer's Incorporated. So where was Sawyer's? In Oregon. Do you have one from there?
Yeah.
All right. Very fun.
They're still making them.
Are they? They haven't exported them.
Not that I know of.
That's amazing. Wonderful. So the 1930s saw a boom in media exposure. Radio, newspaper cartoons, movies, all were used to promote toys. These promotional devices sold Shirley Temple dolls, Buck Rogers paraphernalia, of course, all of which are worth a small fortune today. However, expensive purchased toys were not a reality for many U.S. children, particularly in Montana, where the impact of the Depression was particularly prevalent. Play and toys at this time, one sociologist says, was self-directed, I love this, self-initiated and sparked by the need to entertain oneself using only one's resources. Street games, yard games, kick the can, paper, scissors, stone, truth or dare, Depression-era children made the best of what they had. The best and the worst toy I've been told about, excuse me, I'm going to have to, got a bit of a cold, that I have been lucky enough to have described to me was a rubber band gun. And it's not a rubber band like the kind that are in the newspapers. But I was told that children would take old inner tubes that were no longer good for anything else, and they would cut bands out of them and then get a piece of wood shaped like a gun and then stretch that rubber band from here to here and then shoot it at your little brother. Oh, But when you think of that, that had to been kind of wicked. But I have heard that from multiple sources about these crazy rubber band guns. And then I've heard of people getting very sophisticated with the trigger mechanism, using clothespins to hold back. Ingenious stuff, but you wouldn't want to be a little brother, for sure. So out of this era, Buck Rogers rocket pistol, first sold in 1934. The first stuffed Mickey Mouse in 1930. Right? Army men, the kind that many of us grew up with. These are cowboys and Indians, but I know that have Army men. 1938, the kind with the base. Okay. One of my, 1940s, okay. So with the war, toy manufacturers suffered from the lack of materials, obviously, as did the rest of the country, and factories redirected their focus. For example, the primary kiddie car manufacturers, which were based in Ohio, started making war machines, and most of them were not able to reestablish that business out of the war. One of the few companies that thrived during the war was the Acro-Agate Glass Company. And during the 20s and 30s and early 40s, they made cheap, I call it slag glass, planters, ashtrays. Every once in a while you run across an Acro-Agate lamp base. So inexpensive glass. But after Pearl Harbor, we were no longer importing little tea sets from China, right? So they started making marbles and tea sets. And their glass is so wonderfully unique. It came in they had sets. All right. I'm trying to see if I have anything that actually, so these, you'll see that these have the same pattern. And when you can look at the bottom, this is a crow, Acro-Agate. Get it? Honest to gosh, I couldn't believe it when I read that. But there you go. Have some tea. They had larger sets. Okay. And not all of them are marked. But again, the glass is so easy to spot. And I find this fascinating because when I've been in situations where wonderful women that I was interviewing pulled out their tea sets, and if they pull out Acro-Agate, you can date it within 5 years. It was during the Second World War. So, tea, anybody? There you go. And some of the molds were more sophisticated than others. So even with the Acro-Agate, they had the cheaper line and the more expensive lines. But great fun. You're not going to miss this next time you guys go to an estate sale. So, Acro-Agate. And I do have a couple, I'm not a marble connoisseur, but I think this one's Acro-Agate. I cannot swear to it. Any marble collectors in the place? Do you have some? Okay. All right. Well, the Acro-Agate, now the collectors will tell you, they have, there would be something like this, but it would be vibrant red, and they call it oxblood. And they're just different terms to the different combinations of colors they were using. And so, I could just collect anything and everything. It's but just fun stuff.
I have some of my grandfather's.
And are they made out of glass? Wonderful. See, I couldn't tell you the age except for the one or two I think might be Acro-Agate. That is no problem. Aren't they fun?
Almost like the depression glass and the
green.
See, the green seemed to be a predominant color, and I often wonder if there's a correlation there. Yeah. Okay. So acro-agate. By 1949, plastic and inexpensive material were cheaper to manufacture, and between the cheaper materials and the reestablishment of importations from Japan, acro-agate company went out of business. Isn't that sad? Now, let's see, some good stories. All right, so the first Slinky made its debut in the Gimbel department store in Philadelphia in 1945. Invented, and I'm going to use that loosely, by Navy engineer Richard James, who was attempting to find a suspension device to make sailing on battleships less rough. When he noticed that a torsion, a Torsion spring will walk end over end when it's knocked over. Isn't that great? Candyland was first sold in the late 40s. All right? It was developed for children with polio. The game's creator, Eleanor Abbott, designed the game while recovering from the illness herself. Milton Bradley quickly agreed to buy the game due to the popularity among the children who received it. Bubbles were first sold in the early 1940s. The Tootsie Roll Company bought out Chemtoy, who were the first to create the secret bubble solution. Paper dolls during the 40s had a golden age because most of the material for traditional doll making was going into the war effort. And if you ever get on eBay and just put in 1940s paper dolls, amazing, amazing, just fun. So now we're through the 40s. And now we're going to get into the 1950s and 1960s toys. And it is the Cold War meets gender politics. It's amazing what they do to toys. So post-war, 1940, 1960, of course, toy manufacturers enjoyed unprecedented success because of all the baby boomers, of which I am one. While balls, sleds, skates continued to be popular, media, particularly that growing television popularity, barraged children and parents with ads for toys coming out of the Cold War era. Child experts continued to emphasize toys which generated creativity and make good citizens, but also promoted educational toys which often reinforced gender roles. But the Cold War had a direct influence on both parents as well as toy manufacturers. One toy catalog read, this is great, "Parents and teachers everywhere face an unusual challenge. They are being called upon to prepare children for a world so radically new that we dare not forecast its direction, its technology, and its social organization. A bold approach to education in the home and the school is indicated." After the launching of Sputnik by the Soviets, it was obvious to social experts that the American child's creativity had somehow been neglected because the Russians beat us into space. And something had to be done about it. Toy manufacturers and television were more than happy to come up with suggestions. And in short, the sudden, and this is a quote, "sudden proliferation of toys in American homes symbolized the success of the consumer culture and the need to keep those kids entertained." So, 1950s and 60s. I had a metal dollhouse. Of course, we wouldn't have metal dollhouses now because they have sharp edges. But Cape Canaveral, Tommy Burst machine guns, giant gray and blue battle set, Movieland drive-in theater. I work with 30-somethings that don't know what a drive-in theater is. Tiger Joe, the Atomic Cape Canaveral play set, the Barracuda Atomic Sub. The lists go on and on. And ironically, television narrowed the sphere of play in many homes. And it is ironic. Children began playing with their toys in front of the television while they and their parents were inundated with commercials for more toys. Think about that. Oh. But the best we can do is compare Barbie and Ken to G.I. Joe. So first, Barbie. Now this is not an original, this was a Barbie that came out probably 2 or 3 years after the original when the bubble haircut was popular, okay? Barbie by Mattel. You look like you wanted to play with it. By Mattel made her debut in 1959 as a fashion doll, okay? Nancy Ann was a precursor. She was a hybrid of similar dolls who had been sold as teenage dolls but had an exaggerated body. Oh yeah. Ads read, are you ready? Girls of all ages will thrill to the fascination of her miniature wardrobe of fine fabric fashions. She's feminine magic, a veritable fashion show, and every girl can be a star. Barbie could be dressed in bra, girdle, and half slip. The outer clothing ranged from casual dresses for shopping to extravagant satin outfits for attending the theater. One of the more culturally interesting points of Barbie are her tiny feet. What is that? And we've all wondered about that, and I went in search for some sociologist to tell me what was going on, and I finally found a historian by the name of Schwartz. And Schwartz goes on to say, and I quote, "She had permanently shortened Achilles tendons, as many real women who spent too much time in high heels." And interestingly, despite her body design, Barbie's designers meant her to glorify reality, not forsake it entirely. Ruth and Elliot Handler named their creation after their 17-year-old daughter and modeled the doll to be near their daughter's age. Mattel offered at a price everything Barbie needed to make her life complete, including her boyfriend Ken, who interestingly enough, see, Ken and everything that is Ken's belongs to Barbie, who interestingly came as an accessory along with an African-American friend who was sold in 1967. Everything was an accessory for Barbie. So here we have Ken. Now I want you to, I'm going to send Ken around, but look at poor Ken. Couldn't have said it better myself. He's a little stiff. And he's so obviously meant to just be an accessory of Barbie. Sir, would you like to tell your joke to the group?
What, the new one?
Yeah.
The new divorced Barbie?
Yes.
With all Ken stuff?
Yes. Proves my point. Ken is just an accessory to Barbie. So 1959, within a couple of years, we've got Ken and Ken's best friend Alan and Barbie's best friend Midge, and oh my gosh. But now, for those of you who are my age, I don't know if the same was true in your house. I'm 58, but I had a Barbie and then another Barbie. But I have next to no original Barbie clothes because the doll herself was cheap, very inexpensive. It was the toys that, the clothes that were expensive, those accessories. And so my mom, God bless her, can you imagine making darts for Barbie's figure? But my mom was always making Barbie clothes. And one day she finally just gave me a needle and thread and scissors and said, here, do it. Do it. You do it yourself, yeah. I've gone blind. So, while the Barbie world did have just that touch of masculinity from Ken, the world of G.I. Joe was all man. Okay? No girls were in the commercials that I remember, although I am sure there were several little sisters that probably enjoyed G.I. Joe. Now, G.I. Joe, of course, is not a doll. Say it again. He's an action figure because boys don't play with dolls. But now look at the difference here. He's fully articulated. I dare say he's probably got more joints than Teddy Roosevelt had in 1912. He had and I remember, a kung fu grip. And he could hold any weapon that Hasbro or Mattel or whoever made him could throw at him. We've got, my gosh, machine guns, pistols, and then there's a knife there. So this is an action figure. I do remember G.I. Joe commercials, but maybe not in the same way that you did. What do you remember about G.I. Joe commercials?
Fighting man from head to toe.
I don't.
Land on the sea and in the air.
There you go. There you go. That's perfect. You didn't have a G.I. Joe?
My thing was trained.
Okay. So, oh yeah, the noon train is due in and Joe's going to get flattened. I can. So, G.I. Joe was released in 1964, and again, as you've seen, just the opposite of poor Ken's very static body. He was multi-jointed, came with his own collection of accessories. His body and hardware reflected the fact that we were not long out of the Korean War and very well knee-deep into the Vietnam War. Military service was a reality in many boys' futures. Joe had evolved out of the culture of military toys, which had been so popular during the 1950s and 60s. War was a way of life in our country, beyond a doubt. It was on the television every evening, and many families had fathers and sons in the service. But remember, he was an action figure, never to be confused with Ken's accessory status. The original Joe could be purchased and dressed as a Marine, as an MP, a carrier signalman, and or a fireman. All right. So these popular toys not only reflect the current trends in fashion, they symbolized the stereotypes and those gender roles that people were raised with and, beyond a doubt, are still being raised with. All right. And as we go into the 1913, we're knee-deep in it, holiday season, Barbie and her accessories remained popular. However, Barbie and her face and her figure have been revamped to become a little more realistic and to compete with the myriad of other dolls that are out there. She no longer looks like the Barbie doll that's going around. G.I. Joe, on the other hand, is no longer manufactured. After attempting to come back in '82 through 1995, using both different sizes and just different attempts, I'm afraid he was retired. Yes. Maybe that's it. You see, now I think the original 2 has a scar. You know, he's really he's a real man, yeah. So for those of you who weren't here when I first got them out, this one came from Goodwill, and he was just in such good shape, and he talks.
Now hear this. Prepare to launch aircraft.
Okay, shore patrol. Uh-oh. Well, hopefully that will go back in. Anyway, but that one belonged to my brother's, and he was in my folks' basement for years and years, and when I first started putting together this program, I brought him home, and that's been 6 years ago, and I recently had to confess to my brother who lives in Billings, because he's going to be seeing me do this presentation next week. Do you remember your G.I. Joe? What, the one that's in Mom and Dad's basement? Well, yeah. Kinda. Let's see. Okay. So there's kind of a fun example of, I talked about interpretation and different questions and different ways to look at things when you're talking about toys. And that's a great example. Comparing Ken and Barbie to G.I. Joe. I can't think of a better exercise than those two. And of course, those are out of my youth and my girls. So what were Montana's mom and dad's favorite toys? And I would ask, what's in your closet? What was your favorite toy when you were a child? What were your children's favorite toys? Where and why did you get the toy? What did you like about the toy? Or do you have toys that you dislike so much that they just got tucked away and they're still in the bottom of a closet? It's sometimes those toys that we don't like that last because they've not been played to an inch of their lives. So, did you learn anything when you were playing with your favorite toy? Were you learning to be a good little girl? Or a good little boy? Were you learning how to have tea parties and entertain? Why do you think compared to a toy you have given your own child, and how do those two toys compare? How are they different? Are they similar? Why do you think there are differences and similarities? And what more can you add to this conversation and discussion? So museums as well as our homes are filled with material culture. And we use that material culture to learn about the lives of earlier generations, but also about our own lives and our own cultures. Toys are material culture. And if you like toys, what a better way to get into history. With interpretation, with just a little bit of research and asking fun questions. You can create a story around your toys. And my guess is, look at the crazy stories I've got tonight. I know that each one of you have dozens of stories like that about your play and your toys. Your children have dozens of stories, right? They offer a myriad of historical topics, again, those gender roles, the technology, social attitudes, the establishment of transportation, and so much more. And I think they are the perfect topic for generational discussion. All right? We've all played, we've all enjoyed our toys, and I hope we never stop. All right. Questions? Don't lose your marbles.